This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, we now bring you a discussion on significance of G20 summit. The participants are Shashank, former Foreign Secretary, and Mukesh Kaushik, journalist.
Top leaders of the world, including Prime Minister Narendra Modi, are gathering at Buenos Aires for G20 summit. We have with us former Foreign Secretary Shashank. I would come to you, sir, to debate this issue on two segments. One is India-related, what would be India's interest, and second, what would be the international repercussions of G20 summit, given the scenario that world is facing Trump administration and there are tussle between China and US and various other issues. But before come to this, I would rather briefly dwell on the significance of G20 summit in Buenos Aires. And this is the 10th year of G20. That G20 had first meeting in 2008 during the financial crisis, and principal goal at that time was to deal with the financial crisis at that time. Since then, of course, G20 has evolved into a much larger agenda of reforms in international economic system, in taxation systems, issues relating to climate change, energy transition, global economic policy and trade policy are also discussed by the leaders. So at the 10th anniversary of G20, it is certainly our expectations, world's expectation, that leaders will reflect at what has been achieved in past 10 years and what we can look forward to in next 10 years. Shashankji, what would be the future of G20 in next 10 years?
Well, G20 was seen as a manifestation of globalization and the changed realities in the world when the post-World War system of the United Nations Security Council with 5 permanent members had become irrelevant in the new era, and therefore it was felt that the rapidly emerging economies like India, China and others, they should get a seat with the big powers of the OECD. So there used to be meetings of the G7, they were expanded to G8, and Russia was included there, and then ultimately they started with the handshakes with the other emerging economies and gradually changed it, as you said, 10 years ago to G20. But that was the era when the international leaders wanted the developing countries, rapidly developing countries, to abide by the norms which are being set by the G20 or by the G7. Now, unfortunately, what has happened is that the United States has decided for a policy of America first, and the whole thing has moved away from an internationalist approach to a bilateral, transactional approach to take care of the interests of the United States and simultaneously the interests of the other interlocutors. So we see that the same thing is happening now with China, with Russia, everywhere, or with the Palestinian issues, that the President Trump has decided that America will get to new agreements, and so much so that even on nuclear policy, America has now taken very important deviations with regard to North Korea on one hand and Iran on the other. So these are the various issues which we have to keep in mind while G20 meeting is about to take place in Argentina.
We are also listening that there may be some kind of breakthrough deal between US and China so far as economic relations are concerned.
Well, I always look at these issues optimistically, that the Americans are not against total, let's say, they want tariffs, but they don't want sanctions to be imposed on China, because otherwise the Chinese would impose reciprocal sanctions on the United States goods or increase the tariffs to such an extent that the US goods would also suffer. And already we know that the American farmers who sell about 80% of their soya crop is sold to China, and if that is all lying waste because that they cannot sell, and they are the main support base of the Republican Party in the United States. So in midterm elections, they have already suffered certain adverse decisions by the electorate, and I am quite sure that in the next 2 years, when the main elections for president takes place, the American presidents or the parties would be quite cognizant of the Chinese or the other countries taking reciprocal action against the American goods. So therefore, I feel that there would be tariffs, etc., threats of various kinds of pressures, but quite likely they would come to some understanding, some agreement, because we find that while there are informal meetings to take place with other countries, and with India only a trilateral meeting, but with China there will be an informal dinner.
Yeah, but thing is, I think the era of, again, protectionism in coming back.
Absolutely, I agree with you that protectionism is very much there in the air. We started seeing that the climate conference was more or less damaged beyond repair, and it was only France and India who came up with the International Solar Alliance idea, and many Europeans decided to take the lead for the international climate negotiations and the targets to be met. But now the Europeans also have lost track because with the Brexit, they first have to sort out their own affairs. The British will be going out of the European Union next year. They do not know whether they would get favorable trade deals with the US and with India, with China. They are trying to negotiate all these issues. So therefore Europeans are in disarray. Americans have tried to convert everything into a bilateral approach and America first. And that has impact on countries like China, and that those who have gained from the international liberal processes, they are now wondering whether WTO is going to remain functional or not. So the Americans want to even pull out of the WTO. They are not appointing any judges and the other kind of arbitrators or the WTO mechanisms because they feel that there is no question at all of allowing China and Russia to be treated as normal countries. They should be put under pressure all the time.
But in 2008, situation was very different. When in November 2008, all these countries representing 4/5 of the world's economy output came together to forge a collective front against financial panic, then engulfing the West was very different. A decade on, that unity seems to be vanished by, of course, the Trump factor is there. And other G20 countries such as Brazil, Italy and Mexico have turned to populist leaders. In Britain's case, they are grappling with Brexit. And in the case of even host Argentina, who is hosting G20, is enduring its own economic crisis, necessitating deployment of more than 22,000 policemen at the threat of the mass protests when the heads of the government will be gathering on Friday and Saturday. How do you see this evolving situation?
No, the world economy is going through a turmoil. Argentina has already raised the interest rates to somewhere about 60% and may raise further. Turkish lira has collapsed more or less, even though President Trump has agreed to give a time to meet President Erdogan, and that may be because of Saudi Arabia, that Erdogan has been tom-tomming that the Saudi prince was responsible for the murder of one of their journalists, and the CIA has confirmed that. And therefore the Americans are in a bit of a difficult situation. The president wants all the weapons to be sold to Saudi Arabia. They want Saudi to put a lot of money in America, but at the same time the Saudis would like to continue doing whatever they have been doing in the past. So therefore that problem remains. So that is so there are all kinds of other issues which are there. India should be happy that India is not in any of these baskets. India has good relations with Trump. He says Modi is my friend. India is a friendly country. And also the Pew Research Institution and many other institutions, they say that Americans have very favorable kind of a response from the Indian people. And similarly, Indian people have favorable response. But the point is that these difficulties are coming up, and India has to be mindful that Indian economy, which is supposed to grow at the 8% or thereabouts, in very difficult international financial situation, will feel these headwinds. And India will have to work very hard to keep up that kind of growth rate.
Since you brought in India in this debate, there is a very tight schedule of Prime Minister. Since he is going Buenos Aires amid this assembly polls, he would be in next 4 days, at least 48 hours he would be in plane, and at 48 hours he would be on ground. So the schedule of Prime Minister is very tight, and he has to wade through many issues. Yesterday only, Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale told us that Prime Minister would like to highlight at the G20, including risk posed by oil volatility, and this would be something which has direct impact on the Indian economy, and it is something which affects the level of people, and it's incumbent that the leaders of the G20, the largest economies, should reflect on. So how do you see this, that India would be highlighting price volatility?
No, India has to be mindful because India is dependent up to 80% of oil coming from abroad. Iran is being put under pressure, and so while some temporary reprieve has been given to 8 selected countries including India, and they can continue to import from Iran, but they have been requested to cut down their imports from Iran. Saudi Arabia had at one time agreed to increase their oil exports worldwide and to India also. But now Saudis are thinking in a different way. They want to cut down their because they want OPEC to come to some curtailment of the oil output, so that prices can be, which have gone below $50, they can be kept at slightly higher level. But on the other hand, we find that the United States and Russia, they are pumping more and more. In fact, US seems to have decided the same way as G20 and WTO and climate conference. USA seems to have decided to completely finish off OPEC by becoming the largest oil producing country, and then having the Russians as the second largest producing country. So once again it goes back to a kind of different situation, and the Americans have already announced to the Russians they will withdraw from some of their nuclear treaties. And so the world is going to be totally different, that one will have to come again to new kind of arrangements among the major powers. and India will have to find a place. I mean, we were a non-aligned country, then we became a member of G20, we were aspirants for the permanent membership of the Security Council. Now we find that we have to depend on oil imports from Iran, which is likely to be under great sanctions. So how do we take care of these issues? So long as the oil prices are going down, we should try to build up as much stock as possible and hope that the pipelines and the connectivity projects which we have put in place in and around India, that is on the eastern side via Myanmar and on the western side via Iran, Afghanistan, etc., that they remain in place. So I think that remains the major issue which India has in mind, and India would like these protectionist threats to go away and would like to advise all these countries present in Buenos Aires that they should really think in terms of the international commitments which they have made in the past so that they can adhere to their own commitments.
We were told by Ministry of External Affairs yesterday only that Prime Minister will be making a lead intervention in first session, that is session titled Putting People First. I think it should be the counter to America First, as I understand. And in addition, of course, he will be making subsidiary interventions, not as lead speaker, but as a leader who wishes to comment after the lead speakers have spoken in other two sessions, as well as is in building consensus and enhancing opportunities. And of course, leaders in retreat, all leaders will be free to say each other's mind. You have been in different capacity associated with these kind of summits. What is your experience that India can highlight its own issues in various sessions?
I think Prime Minister has selected a very important subject, that is people first, because we find that in our neighborhood, Pakistan is for terrorism, China is for Chinese control of South China Sea assets and also moving very rapidly into Indian Ocean. They have decided that by 2050 they will become number one country in the world with cyber assets and space assets, etc. But the point is that they are not bothered about people's interests. They would use hundreds of thousands of their own people in jail, or Pakistan would attack many of them with helicopter gunships and drones. China would put them behind bar. India is the one which has to take care of all these people. So we are making a direct appeal, but this is a broad appeal to people of the world and to leaders that they have to keep in mind the interests of the people also.
The issue of terrorism would be on the top of the agenda also.
Well, terrorism remains because India was the first country to have highlighted the issue of terrorism at a time when Western countries thought that terrorism was really something which India had to just hand over Kashmir to Pakistan and all terrorism will disappear. Now they have found that terrorism is coming all over and attacking many of their peaceful cities. And so the scenario has changed completely. Therefore, terrorism now has found many adherents who would like to counter it. And that is in a way good that India has set up many counter-terrorism agreements and working groups so that we are trying to get technical assistance, etc. So even though at the international level, the Convention on Terrorism still remains moribund, but at least we are making progress that more and more countries are talking against terrorism. But we need to make sure that our neighbors like Pakistan, China, they talk about it, then I think that will be successful for us.
And one of the topics that Prime Minister will dwell on is digital revolution, and in particular how it leads to new opportunities and new forms of employment. And this is a topic which fits in government programs of Digital India and Skill India, and this is something which is globally relevant at this time when we look at the changes in manner of the global economies are taking place and new employment opportunities are taking place. This Digital India and this digital revolution would be a main highlight of the Prime Minister's speech.
So people first will now come not only against America first, but will also come against the digital economies which are being developed and the AI technologies which are being developed. So therefore, Prime Minister has to make sure that India takes advantage of all this.
We understand that India has also circulated a concept paper for G20 countries, and we should hope that Indian agenda would be highlighted in a great way. Thank you, Shashank.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on significance of G20 summit. The participants were Shashank, former Foreign Secretary, and Mukesh Kaushik, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.